You're a time traveler, sent back to the year 1930. Your task is to inform your own grandfather about the cultural shifts happening in the 2000s era, specifically around our time now, 2020. As you're telling him about the world literally turning upside down and explaining our beliefs, our culture, the wars we're fighting, and just every little aspect of life, you get to the point where you're discussing memes. And specifically, you get to the point about furries. Imagine trying to describe to your grandfather what a furry is. How would that go over in the 1930s? Hey, man, in our time, there's thousands of people that dress up like cartoon wolves or other animals, and they meet together in conferences. And, it's kind of sexual sometimes too. And they make artwork, and yeah, that's our time. That wouldn't go over very well. He wouldn't understand. He couldn't comprehend what the hell you're talking about. But imagine, instead of going to the 1930s, you time travel back to the year 500 AD. And you meet your great-great pagan grandfathers dancing in the forest over a campfire. And your task is the same, to tell them about life. And you're telling them about furries. Hey, in our time, there's a bunch of people. They wear the skins of the wolf. They go and they meet together and they party. And it's sexual too. And they make artwork out of this. They would get it. 100%. Why? Let's start off this video by just making a few things clear. This video is not a condemnation of furries. If you're a furry, that's great. We don't really care, but we will be looking at the psychology of the meme, of the group. What's happening with the furry movement? The other thing I want to make clear is that there is some disagreement about what furries are really about. If you were in the movement, people would say, this isn't a sexual movement. But everybody on the outside can clearly see that it is. So what's important to us when we analyze the meme is simply the perception. There's also some alt-right furries, and they don't represent a large portion of the group, but they certainly get a huge amount of screen time, and that perception is important. Let's begin our analysis at the year 500 AD, talking to your great-great pagan grandfather. Why does he understand what a furry is? Why does it not surprise him? Why is he totally down with it? It's because behind it all, even though a furry is very different than a pagan, they share the same beliefs, and specifically the same Dionysian characteristic. We'll touch on the word Dionysian in its meaning a little bit later. But let's begin with the bush soul. The pagan believed that he was a part of the nature around him, whether that was a tree, a rock, or an animal. A lot of times, the bush soul was like your second soul, and it was embodied in an animal. In Game of Thrones, you can see this when the boy becomes a crow or a wolf, and the different families have these different animals that represent their clan. They can become a wolf. That's a lot like a bush soul. In the furry movement, you literally have people, and maybe it's not the entire group, but we're talking a quarter, a third of the people, who don't believe they're fully human. That somewhere along the way, their soul was split and is half wolf. There's a specific word for these people, and they're called Therians. There's also other branches with, I don't really know the difference, but other kin. And they have a similar belief that they are part animal. In this way, the pagan totally understands what it would mean for a furry to take on the persona of an animal, to dress in its skin, and to evoke all the qualities of the animal. Something to point out is that the large majority of furries are all wolves, foxes, or dogs. or even cats, but these are all predatory animals. When the furry takes on the fursona of a wolf, they're trying to compensate for a possible lack in their own persona by borrowing those feral characteristics of the wolf, you know. But at the same time, it's cartoony, so we'll have to explain why it's a cartoon in a minute. But back to the pagan. The pagan evokes on the wolf to give him strength in battle, or to howl at the moon to evoke magic. These things are similar. Carl Jung saw that when the pagan put half of his soul into the bush animal, the bush spirit, that he was essentially making a libido investment in that. It's kind of the same way that you would put yourself into your car and say, my car defines me. And that's our terrible modern example, but in the same way, the pagan puts a bit of their soul into this animal and they say, I am the wolf. Libido plays an important role in the connection between the furry and the pagan. And it's not just because of the bush soul or the creation of one. Libido to the pagan was expressed naturally, completely unhindered. They were hyper-emotional. They would rage if they wanted to rage. They'd have sex if they wanted to have sex. They did not withhold themselves from expression. Now, the furry is doing a similar thing, not the same, but that is why they create a fursona. It's because their human self cannot express the things they wish it would. They create a fursona, and it does that for them. It is an animal. It is wild. And it is very counterculture, too. And that's important, because what we're seeing is a regression to paganism. Paganism offers the Dionysian idea of being free to do what you want, to express yourself, to be artistic, to create, to be creative. Nietzsche came up with this Apollonian versus Dionysian dichotomy. And he believed that individuals, and societies as a whole too, would embody these aspects of either an Apollonian or a Dionysian. The Apollonian looks like a statue. It's chiseled, it's planned out, it's concerned about intellectualism, and that kind of thing. The Dionysian is the opposite. The Dionysian is drunk and full of ecstasy and emotion, rage. Dionysus, the god of wine and madness, is where Dionysian comes from. He is the god of this attitude. And what do you know? That's pretty much exactly what the pagan is. The pagan is Dionysian. It's very clear to me that the furry is related to the Dionysian. When we look at the god Dionysus, he is surrounded by what are called maenads and satyrs. And satyrs were half animal, half man. Interestingly enough, they're also promiscuous sexual beings. You see that here in this little statue. Furries have the same reputation of being strangely promiscuous with their artwork and activities. Dionysus was full of madness. The furries look kind of mad to us, don't they? They're pretty odd. Dionysus was called the twice born. I won't go into the story of why he's called the twice born, but it was very interesting to me, researching this video, that there are huge furry groups and communities that were started on the internet in a virtual reality place called Second Life. So a bit of a synchronicity there, that they are also twice born. We pull all these pieces together, the Dionysian attitude, the fursona, paganism, we put it all together and we see that furries are in fact regressing into paganism, regressing back through time. This isn't just conjecture though. I have proof that furries are regressing to paganism. In the United States, 0.4% of people identified as pagan. However, when they did a survey of furries and they looked at their religions, 11% of them are pagan and identify as pagan or Wicca. And there's an additional 26 or whatever percent of other that just doesn't fit in, and I'm sure that you would find more pagan ideas in that category. The jump from 0.4% to 11% in identification as a pagan is insane. Those numbers are astronomical, and it does prove that there is a condensation of a pagan attitude in the community. There is a distinction to be made between the pagan ancestors of the furry and the furry himself, though. Where the pagan freely expressed himself, and that was natural to him, it is very unnatural to the furry. The furry is displaying a few behaviors that psychologist Sigmund Freud would describe as Oedipal or oral. There's also some evidence that the furry is regressing in all areas of life, not just regressing to paganism, but regressing in ideology, like we see here with the alt-right Nazi furries, regressing in time to the Nazi period. And there's also the simple fact that furries live with their parents, statistically. Furries are not going out into the world and interacting with the world. They are interacting with fantasy. That is why the furry dresses as a cartoon wolf. This is a libidinal investment in fantasy, in cartoon. Really what the furry is wearing is not the skin of the wolf, the primal wolf, but the perverse skin of the cartoon. The furry does not want to grow up. When I was researching for the video, I found several memes saying like, when my dad says I get a wife, yeah, right. You know, there's this attitude of wanting to stay like a child, like Peter Pan. And this is why I said Oedipal attitude, oral attitude. The furry is still a child. They still do childish things. And the fursona that they use is childish. Now maybe when that furry is out of their fursuit, they're a different person altogether, and I don't know. But what I do know is that the fursuit is simply a regression back into an infantile state. Why does the furry regress? That's a complicated question, really. There's not one answer for every furry out there. In fact, we all kind of regress in our own way. Maybe you and I aren't wearing a fursuit, but the world is a scary place. And this desire to revert back to the cartoon, to the fun, playful, the innocent sexuality, is just a reflection of the fact that the furry has a conflict with his parents, capitalism, consumerism, which are also his parents, religion, as many of them are becoming atheist, agnostic, or pagan, reverting to these old religions. They're reverting away from the world and not engaging with it. It's because they want freedom of expression, libidinal expression, and that's also why it's a sexual movement. But it's not necessarily healthy. Maybe it could be, but I don't think that it is, because we are not engaging with the world. And who can blame them? The world is incredibly messed up and scary right now. But it's only that when we go beyond ourselves, not split ourselves into a separate persona, but to push forward. As you push forward, remember not to lose yourself in the realms of fantasy, video games, and the plentiful distractions of consumerism that are all around you. Instead, become an individual. Become more human, emotional and strong, Dionysian and perhaps Apollonian as well. Be you, and remember, memes matter.